Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. He's here to talk a little bit about the Birds, and they made their first significant move of the offseason today. They cut ties with Darius Slay. Did they cut ties for good? Could he be back? Well, that's why Geoff Mosher's here. He has all the answers to these key questions, and he joins us for today's edition of Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on this Monday there, Geoff Mosher? How are you, my friend?
I'm great. I'm watching you here on the YouTube stream, StreamYard stream. I see you got that nice Phillies zip up. It's getting me excited for baseball. I'm in the middle of one of those email fantasy baseball drafts, but I'm still focused on football, Mike. We got free agency starting at this time next week with the legal tampering period. And of course, as you mentioned, the Eagles making moves today. And here we go with the offseason.
Well, they made the first significant move of the offseason. Now, let's first start with this. Was this a surprise, or is this something that was to be foreseen and expected?
I mean, definitely not a surprise. Even Darius Slay himself had been talking about not sure if he'd be back, with the Eagles next year during the end of the season, and in the Super Bowl media circuit, he was talking about it. So not a surprise at all. He's 34 years old. He's been dealing with some knee problems for a little while now. Had a procedure on that. He's expensive, so they have an opportunity to say, well, expensive for what the Eagles are facing. You have two young stud corners in QuinyonMitchell and Cooper DeJean. And so we'll see. Obviously they're going to part ways with him as a June 1 designation. And I think we'll get our answers, Mike, in free agency as to how we think the Eagles will use Cooper DeJean. If they go out and try to get a different outside corner, that whether it's the draft or free agency, then they're going to keep DeJean at nickel. And I know that there's some momentum in the building from some to keep DeJean at nickel. But if they don't make a move and they don't bring Isaiah Rodgers back, and you're looking at maybe like Keely Oringo or Ricks, then it probably signifies that they're going to move DeJean outside and then try to replace the nickel spot.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot here that Geoff just broke down. Let's start with this. He said a couple of weeks ago he hopes to play one more year. He actually said on this podcast with Amon-Ra St. Brown that he definitely wants to play one more year. He did indicate either Philadelphia or Detroit. How likely do you think it is that Philadelphia would want him and bring him back? Obviously at their price, but do you think they're ready to move on?
Well, they've already determined that he's not a $16 million a year corner. I think that's what the cap number was if they had kept him on, right? I know they saved $4 million, but I don't, for his age and his knee issues lately, I don't know what kind of contract he's going to get out there. I would be shocked if it was more than a year. It might be a 2-year deal, but really just guaranteed money in year one. So that's really like a 1-year deal. And I don't know if it'll be anything north of 7 or 8 million. So the question then becomes, and I heard you and Josh talking about this because Darius has talked about it on his own podcast. He wants to play another year, but I don't think he wants to play another year on a really low contract because he still sees himself as good enough to be a starter. And I don't think he wants to give anybody some kind of big play Slade, big discount, right? So he's got children. He can go watch them play high school sports. If he feels like it's just not worth it to come back on a really low contract, then he can just walk off into the sunset. And so I think that's the big chess match here: is do the Eagles or another team offer him enough to at least keep him interested in playing for another year?
Right. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here. Darius Slay gets released today. That's the next thing. They'll save like $4.3 million against the cap. He will be 34. He had a pretty solid season last year. So let's talk a little bit about what's next for the Eagles. I'm fascinated by what could happen with Cooper DeJean. Does Vic Fangio value him so much in the role that he had him and find that role so hard to duplicate, and that it might be easier? And I know that sounds weird to say it's easier to find an outside guy because that's a very important position. But how do you see if they move on from Slay? Is it an in-house guy, a draft, a free agent? DeJean, how do you break that down?
Yeah, and if they do wind up bringing back Slay for a year, on a much lower deal, then you know that he's going to be the outside corner with QuinyonMitchell and that Cooper DeJean will be the nickelback. And it's a really important role that DeJean played in Vic Fangio's defense, because as a nickel, you're technically an extra corner defensive back, but really you're kind of like a linebacker as well, a weak side backer. You can blitz. You're a big part of the sim pressure package of a 4-man rush that you can't be too much if you're an outside corner, if at all. So there's a lot of good reasons to want Cooper DeJean to stay at nickelback. However, I will say, and this is really more of a conversation for, I guess, a year or two from now, Cooper DeJean's a good player, good athlete, and those guys always want to get paid like good players and good athletes. And as you know, Mike, nickelbacks do not get paid the same way as outside corners. So I don't know if this will be a conversation for after the 2025 season between his agency and the Eagles saying, hey, you've got a guy who can play outside corner. You're keeping him in nickel because it's best for you, but it's not best for him and his second contract.
Yeah.
So you either have to make this work or move him to the outside, or overpay him as a nickel, knowing he can play outside. But again, that is a conversation down the road.
It's a conversation down the road. We brought it up earlier. I said, because I don't look at Cooper as the kind of guy that would press it. You mentioned his agent could be the one that says, because I don't think Cooper's the kind. I don't know. I've never talked to Cooper. I don't know him, but it doesn't seem to me that, like, if Vic Fangio says, hey, we want you to say it's slot corner, he's like, nah, coach, that's not happening. I'm an outside guy. I feel like he would do whatever best for the team, and that's what puts him in a weird situation.
Well, I think I don't want to put myself in Cooper DeJean's head. I think most guys on rookie contracts are willing to do what it takes for the first year or two, but he is a competitor, and most competitive guys want to show that they can rub elbows with the best at their position. And I'm sure at Iowa he was an outside corner who played a little bit of nickel. So I don't want to just assume that because he's like this small town Iowa kid that he's always going to play nice for 4 years. And I've seen plenty of guys from all walks of life and all backgrounds decide at some point that they want to be considered the best of the best.
Yeah, no, it's funny because we were talking earlier, like, that guy has been on the media tour. I mean, since the Super Bowl, he has done everything. I mean, from North Wildwood out to Iowa. I mean, he has been everywhere. It seems like the kind of guy that's just like living the dream. I'll do whatever. But you're right. No, his agent could say, and that could be. But I guess, in your opinion, his role in what he did at that spot, nickel corner, I mean, he was almost so far and away the best guy at that position. Like, I don't know, what he was able to do, did that allow the Eagles defense to be, or like if you moved him to the outside, can somebody, I don't want to say replicate, but is it such a drop-off that you're like, I might have to actually keep him there because it might be easier to find someone to play outside?
I think that the question you're asking is the actual root question the Eagles have to figure out is, which is easier to replace, the outside corner or the nickel back in Vic Fangio's defense? And like 9 times out of 10, someone's going to tell you the outside corner. But when you watch the Eagles defense last year, you would say, hey, you know what? Slay was in and out at times. They had to play Rodgers. Rodgers actually made a couple of plays. I don't know if anybody could have. When Maddox made one play, he made literally, I know it was an important
Super Bowl.
Play. It was the Super Bowl, but he also gave up a bunch of plays when he had to go in and play that nickel spot. But I still think at the end of the day, when the Eagles are evaluating their options, and do remember the Eagles, we reported this quite early when they drafted Cooper DeJean, that they, unlike a lot of teams we spoke to, Adam and I spoke to a lot of teams thought he was a safety. A lot of teams thought he was a safety/nickel. The Eagles drafted him with the mindset that he could play the outside, and they still believe that. So not only did they have to figure out where his value is best right now, is it nickel or outside, but if they want his value to be at nickel and they bring in outside options, they also have to evaluate, well, is this guy I'm about to sign to my outside corner better than Cooper DeJean, what we projected for Cooper DeJean to be? Because you're only as good as your weakest link. And if you're not putting a quality or adequate outside corner out there just to keep Cooper DeJean at nickel, you're hurting your defense, because theoretically, Mike, it is easier to replace the nickel back, and you can certainly find someone in the draft or free agency who can play that position fairly well, who understands the position, who gives you that like blitz versatility. I'm not saying there's 100 of them out there that are great, but it's hard to be great at every position. So they do have to figure out not only what's best for the defense, but where Cooper DeJean is going to help them the most.
Okay, let's get a couple thoughts from Geoff on this. Isaiah Rodgers is set to become a free agent next week. Is he a guy that they would, if they bring him back, does that tell you what you need to know?
100%. And, that's something they can do now. They don't have to wait for the legal tampering period. They don't have to wait. I mean, they could do it while we're having this conversation because he's an in-house free agent. And now that they've already decided to make that move with Darius Slay, you can imagine that they're at least having conversations with Rodgers and his folks.
How were they when he was on, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, Slay missed a lot of time with this knee. Did Rodgers, in your mind and to their mind, play well enough that they would feel comfortable bringing him back to be the starting outside corner?
It's my understanding they want him back, so if whether that's to be a definitive starter or to say, hey, we're bringing you back and giving you the opportunity. We have Ricks, we have Ringo. We may draft a corner in the first, second, third round. Who knows? But our understanding is that they want him back, and you would have to think if they did have him back, he would be the lead candidate to start outside opposite QuinyonMitchell, and that would keep Cooper DeJean at the nickel spot.
Okay, over at Inside the Birds, you wrote about this. I did not see you mention the other guys, Ringo, Rick, any of those guys. They would not be someone they'd feel comfortable starting over there to replace Slay?
Comfortable is an interesting word. They're on the team. They've put time into Ricks and Ringo, so they certainly value them to an extent. Ringo's become a very good special teams player. Ringo is a strange player in that he can run straight line very well for a guy who's big, but he's not loose-hipped. And so he's not ideal as your starting outside corner. I don't think I know that's how the Eagles view it as right now. It's not ideal for him to be your starting outside corner. Now, you bring him to camp with 3 other guys and he has a great camp and he's, it's hard to kind of learn looseness in your hips. You either have it or don't.
Right.
But you can improve, and you can improve mentally in a game that helps you compensate like T.J. Edwards did for your lack of natural athleticism, right? Yeah. So you give him the opportunity, but as we sit here right now, I know that they don't feel he's the ideal replacement at the outside corner spot.
Okay, I guess the other 2 options are, free agency. Do you lose Slay? Do you bring in a free agent corner and say we're going to invest money at that spot, like real money, like an Asante Samuel Jr. is a big name guy who's available, or do you go back to the draft? And obviously these are all options, but
don't forget about the sneaky third option, Mike. And Adam and I were just talking to this before I came on air with you, because this is an area where the Eagles really excel at. The sneaky third option of trading for a player who is 3 years into his contract, and for whatever reason, his team hasn't re-signed him. Maybe it's a team with cap issues. Maybe he's good, but the team doesn't want to commit. Like the Bengals, T. Higgins is good, but they're having issues right there. But perhaps there's a corner around the league who's in a similar situation that, say, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was a couple of years ago with the Saints, right? Or, at this time last year, we were saying this about Patrick Surtain because he hadn't yet agreed to a contract extension. There's always players like that. The Eagles got Ronald Darby that way from the Buffalo Bills. I'm trying to think of some other. Timmy Jernigan from the Ravens. I'm trying to act like I know something, like doing the old Brian Windhorst fingers in the air thing. But I am just saying that this is an area that we tend to forget about, that Howie does not forget about and uses to his advantage.
Yeah, and it's funny because, they drafted QuinyonMitchell and DeJean. I mean, they put draft capital into that position. And over the years, they have gotten all these young corners that they've got a chance to take a look at. And it could be a guy like Isaiah Rodgers who just got off the scrap heap because he was gambling and got suspended. The Colts released him, that they end up picking up, and he's the answer to some of the questions there. I do want to get your thoughts, unless you have anything else to add on Slay and some big picture thoughts, because a week from today, we're going to be talking about somebody, I would imagine.
Absolutely. We've spent so much time talking about guys that the Eagles may or may not keep, and not, as we're doing now, sort of talking about the landscape and what's out there that they might have to bring in to replace.
All right. Let's go to what Washington did. Deebo Samuel for a 5th-round pick. I saw their betting odds didn't change. Plus 1,800 to win the Super Bowl did not change. Still plus 1,800 to win the Super Bowl. So imagine Vegas doesn't think that Deebo Samuel's a big impact. What do you think about what Washington did and what that adds to them? Are they now, in your mind, a way more legitimate threat?
Way more legitimate? I can't say way more. I do think it's a very good move. I know that some Eagles, I guess Eagles Twitter is having fun with it. I've seen all sorts of I don't know, this Drewski guy, I think it is, and 49 of Deebo, they're all trying to make fun of his weight and everything like that, and saying Deebo is overweight and a big dude now. I have a feeling that a change of environment and scenery will be good for Deebo. I think the offense that Cliff Kingsbury run, with its horizontal nature, it caters really well to how they're going to use him. I think that even if he's somewhat of a declining player than he was 4 or 5 years ago, still probably a better option than, say, Diami Brown or Noah Brown, or maybe even Olamide Zaccheaus, although I kind of like Olamide Zaccheaus, but still.
Yeah, but in a third role. Yeah. But I don't think it hurts them. I do think it helps them, gives them a nice little weapon. I don't think they're done by any stretch of the means, and to only give up a 5th-round pick is, to me, a good play for them. I agree with what you just said, because for me, one of Washington, now their offense wasn't their biggest problem, but adding him to their offense with Kingsbury is a guy I think is going to figure out, much like, listen, he had a very good offensive designer and play caller in San Francisco, but I think McLaurin has been a pain in your ass for the last couple of years. And now he's never really had anybody to play across from him. Now you got not only someone to play across from, a legitimate weapon there. But I also think this is a sign that Washington is taking their swing right now. They think they're there.
Yeah, I think so. I would expect them to be very aggressive, continue to be very aggressive this offseason. I think the best thing that they can do is keep surrounding Jane Daniels with talent the way Howie did when things were looking pretty bare after 2020, and then all of a sudden you get Devontae Smith, and then you trade for A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert becomes the man after they move on from Ertz, and then the offensive line, of course, being the starter for all of that success. So I would say if they could continue to work on that offensive line, that they're going to be pretty good. Defensively, it sounds like they're going to move on from Jonathan Allen, but they had the first round. They had Juice Newton from last year ready to slide in. I imagine they'll get some edge rush. They have a lot of money, so again, they're not done. I think they'll be pretty formidable next year.
They both Dallas and Washington. We were talking about this earlier. I don't know if you were listening at that point, but or watching. Their team needs line up with the Eagles free agents. Dallas needs a guard. How about Becton? Dallas needs a linebacker. What about Bond? Dallas needs a corner. Do they bring in Slay for a year? Dallas needs a running back. Do you go after Gainwell? All their team they need a D. Well, I guess they just franchise. What's his name? And Washington, same thing. They need a linebacker. Do you bring? If I'm Washington and Dallas, I'm making a big play for Bond to try to drive the price up.
Well, is Bobby Wagner a free agent? Was that only a 1-year deal? Because Luvu's a really good linebacker. I would think if I'm Washington, I'd probably spend a little more time on my edge rush and my secondary.
We talk about Washington needs an edge rusher. You go after Sweat. They need a corner. Maybe they bring it just to say, hey, we're coming after you with your own guys.
Yeah, listen, it's been done before, right? That's certainly been done. The Niners signed Javon Hargrave away from the Eagles, and they went to the Super Bowl that year.
Yeah.
So that certainly has been done before.
Yeah, Wagner, by the way, yes, he is a free agent. So they need a linebacker to replace Bobby Wagner. You've also got – there was another position that we were talking about. Oh, Washington needs a tackle. Did they take Becton and make him a tackle?
You mean an offensive tackle? I think Becton's going to be a very, very interesting case study for teams. I can see a team committing some big money to him over a short-term deal, and I can also see a team saying, we're just not sure. We don't have Stoutland. We don't have that kind of infrastructure. We're going to pass and go with someone who's a little bit more natural to the position. So we'll see what happens. I do think somebody's probably going to wind up ponying up more money than we think. But I'd be surprised if he got guaranteed money into the third year. I just don't know.
This time next week, we will know probably who is staying and who is going, at least some of the answers to those questions. We'll have a Mosher Monday with Geoff Mosher next week on Football at 4. He'll be back on Wednesday. We'll see if the Eagles make any other decisions and moves with this roster. Darius Slay has been released today. That is the first domino of the 2025 Eagles roster. And, of course, you've heard it right here on the Sports Bash. Football at 4, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. All right, buddy. See ya.
Take care, buddy.